Back, WNST, Taos in Baltimore, and WNST.net. This guy is sick of me and our travels up and down Interstate 43, or is it 94? And I still haven't figured out north, south, east, and west out in the Midwest where roads go north and south, and they call them east and west. He is Luke Jones. He was our compadre and co-host for all things Lambeau Field this weekend. And, I was very, very disappointed they did not have hot chocolate with marshmallows in the press box up there. I feel like that's something I need to complain about up there. But other than that, I'll take a 23-0 victory at Lambeau Field, and it was your first pilgrimage up there. I know you were tickled to death just to be there, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know me being the baseball guy I am. I mean, baseball is my favorite sport. I mean, doesn't mean I don't love football, but you always think about ballparks in baseball, and certainly you did a tour a couple years ago seeing all those ballparks. But, we tend to be more nostalgic, more romantic about being at a baseball ballpark compared to football stadiums. I mean, clearly you don't have asymmetry and weird dimensions and things of that nature. So, it's kind of just logical that you're not going to be as excited about seeing a football stadium. But Lambeau Field's unique, and certainly it's been renovated, it's been modernized in certain ways, but it still has the charm, and it's still one of those unique places. I mean, you know this, Nestor. I mean, you've been to more football stadiums than I've been to. Many of them you go to that have been built over the last 20 to 25 years, you can kind of just drop in anywhere, and other than maybe the color of the seats, other than maybe some little defining factor somewhere in the stadium, they look very similar. All the amenities, all that, but Lambeau Field, that's a different animal, and regardless of it, before the game even started, really, really cool getting to watch a football game there, knowing all the history in Green Bay and Titletown.
And you didn't get to see the Packers score a point. How about that, huh? All that offense they've had up there the last 20 years. To recap where we are on all of this, I mean, I don't think anything that's happened over the last 10 weeks, and even the bloodbath over in Wembley, and all the fallout from that, and even the way they lost to the Steelers and the Bears, I think as an optimist, I really am looking forward to hanging the purple lights here this month. I think they're going to win some football games here over the next month. I'm almost counting on it. I don't want to be cocky about it, but I do feel like Thanksgiving is going to lead to Christmas, and those last two games, they're going to have an opportunity to play themselves in. And I know we spent some time after the game watching the Raiders get annihilated down in Mexico by New England, watching Marvin beat the Denver Broncos, and watching all these middling teams out there. The Ravens have a real opportunity. And as much as we watch the whole league here, you start to say there's a lot of bad teams. Well, let's be the best of the bad teams then. That should be the Ravens' charge to get the 9 victories.
Yeah, and I actually think that's an appropriate, objective way of putting it. Not necessarily bad, but I'm still not convinced this team's any better than okay. But when you look at the rest of the AFC, beyond the top few teams, and then you get to the second half of the AFC, the second division, so to speak, there's a lot of bad quarterbacks, a lot of bad football teams, other teams that have just been overwhelmed with injuries. And you look at the Ravens, you look at those other teams, you look at the Ravens' remaining schedule, you look at the fact that they're now in that 6th spot via tiebreaker over Buffalo with a better conference record. And boy, I don't know, unless you're so down on this team, or you expect, heaven forbid, an injury to Joe Flacco or Jimmy Smith or Terrell Suggs, or name your top player that you want to point to. I don't see enough losses left on this schedule, and I don't think they're going to go 6-0. I don't think that for a minute.
But, dude, if they go out to Cleveland, you and I go out there 3 weeks from now, and they lay a steamer and lose to DeShone Kizer and let him throw 2 touchdowns, and, Flacco gets a strip sack and throws a pick 6. I mean, if that kind of thing happens around here, shame on them. Shame on them if they lose to Tom Savage at home, or DeShone Kizer, or Jacoby Brissett at home. I mean, there's some of these that are just, it would be inexcusable, but, they lost to Mitch Trubisky, and I know we do bring that up around here, right? So that
you have to, because it's part of the narrative of the season. It's part of what this team has been. It has looked pretty darn good in its victories. I mean, just look at the final margin of victory. I mean, they won 20-0 over Cincinnati. They won by 14 points over the Browns. They won by 13 in Oakland, albeit E.J. Manuel filling in for Derek Carr. We know what happened on Thursday night against the Dolphins, where they scored 40 points and posted their second shutout of the year. And on Sunday, I mean, it wasn't a whole lot of offense. Certainly wouldn't point to the offense as being a big reason why they won whatsoever. But you have a defense that now has 3 shutouts. That's one shy of the 2000 Ravens. And that's something that's impressive. And I know people will point out that, well, yeah, there are 5 wins. You look at it, Andy Dalton, Deshaun Kaiser, E.J. Manuel, Matt Moore, and Brett Hundley.
Hey, but by the way, if you go back to 2001, they beat Spurgeon Wynn too, right?
And I'm glad you said that. I actually was just doing some of the research, and I'm going to touch on this at WNST.net at some point here early in the week.
Our resident historian, Luke Jones.
Yeah, I'll run you down the 12 regular season wins for the Ravens in 2000. You ready?
Go ahead.
Kent Graham, Mark Brunell twice,
he was
Scott
good.
Mitchell, Tim Couch, Achilles Smith, Steve McNair, of course, Tennessee, great games with the Titans back in those days. Troy Aikman, and I believe that was his final season and was a shell of what he had been. Didn't have a very good supporting cast around him. Spurgeon Wynn, Ryan Leaf, Jake Plummer, Vinny Testaverde. I mean, there are a few solid names in there. Beyond that, and that's not to disparage the 2000 Ravens, but we always, as time goes on, we always romanticize the past. We always say nothing's better than what happened in the past. And for the record, I'm still saying I think that absolutely is a superior defense to what we're seeing in 2017. And part of that is by rules. Today's game is catered towards more offense compared to back in 2000, nearly 2 decades ago at this point. But it's just to put a little context in there for anyone trying to dismiss what this current defense has done when they've played at a high level, and they've had some rough games. There's no doubt about that, and they had their issues stopping the run as we kind of got into October, and they were missing Brandon Williams. But it just goes to show that you can only control the variables that are kind of just thrown in front of you. I mean, it's not their fault that Aaron Rodgers was hurt, and yeah, it might have been different if Aaron Rodgers was on the field, but guess what? He wasn't. So you can keep talking about that until you're blue in the face, but the reality is the Ravens picked up their 3rd shutout of the season. Yes, Brett Hundley is not going to make anyone confuse him with Brett Favre. I mean, he was horrible. There's no doubt, but the Ravens had something to do with that, and I think it's important to recognize that. And if you're looking for reasons to be optimistic, besides the fact that all the rest of these AFC playoff, quote, contenders, and I use that term very loosely when you look at some of these teams hovering around 4 or 5 wins, the Ravens are in good position scheduling-wise, looking at those other teams. But this defense, I think you look at the fact, regardless of the opponent, the last 3 games now in a row, they've shut down the run. And that was the main sticking point with what was plaguing this defense. Yes, I know they gave up the final drive in Tennessee. I won't forgive them for that. That's the kind of drive that differentiates good from great. And that was a case where you say, yeah, they had a good performance, but they had a chance to have a great second half, and they couldn't do that. So they're still chasing greatness consistently, but in this day and age, it is very difficult to shut out a team in the NFL. I mean, just go count up the shutouts in the league this year. There aren't that many, and the Ravens have 3 of them. It's a good thing because over half their wins have been via shutout. It shows how much they've needed their defense to play at a high level, and they'll continue to need it to play at a high level because this offense, yeah, you'd like to think they can improve some here and there, and I think they can here and there, but it's still going to be a below-average offense. It's still going to be an offense that has deficiencies and weaknesses, and when you go up against a more powerful offense like a Pittsburgh, not that Detroit's a juggernaut, but certainly Matthew Stafford is a way better quarterback than what the Ravens have mostly seen this year. They're going to have to figure out a way to score points in those games to have a chance to win. So the warts are still there. I haven't necessarily drastically viewed my opinion on the quality of this Ravens team after the 23-0 win on Sunday, but I certainly look at it with a more positive outlook, just looking at the fact that, hey, they're 5-5, bunch of teams are chasing them, bunch of teams have more difficult more difficult schedules the rest of the way, and the Ravens, these 6 games, 4 of them at home, mind you, you only look at a couple of those and say, okay, Pittsburgh, probably a loss, but you never know. We know what this rivalry is. Detroit, that's certainly not a game where you can just expect to show up and the Lions are just going to lay down.
Well, they can't run the ball. I mean, and that really plays right into the hands of the Ravens, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, that team's 4-1 on the road, so give them some credit in that regard. But beyond those 2 teams, you look at the rest of this schedule, and yeah, it's a road game at Cleveland. Yeah, the people will say the law of averages says they're going to win a game at some point here, maybe. But still, the Ravens are a clear favorite in that one. They're a clear favorite in the remaining 3. Yeah, that Bengals game, Week 17, I think a lot of that is going to do with what mindset do the Bengals have at that point. I mean, they've won. They've gotten off the mat ever so slightly.
By the way, Marvin's in there pitching right now that they're going to be the team playing in January, right? I mean,
and that's my point. They're kind of, sort of, a little bit hanging around. I mean, they're 4-6. You do look at their schedule. I mean, they have some winnable games on that schedule the rest of the way. They've got some tough games.
Well, they're the team that can feast if the Ravens do lose to Jacoby Brissett or
yeah.
Deshaun Kaiser. They're going to be that like the Chargers. I mean, these teams, some of these 4-6 teams are coming. I don't think the Houston Texans can get there. I think the Bengals and the Chargers can get there because they still have, like Joe Flacco, they still have like real NFL quarterbacks. Andy Dalton's a real NFL quarterback. Phillip Rivers is as well. I'm not sure Tom Savage is, and I'm convinced Brett Hundley is not, right? So, after watching that, if you don't have that, you can't do much. And that's Denver's detriment right now. They're going to finish in last place in that division. And that's kind of an unbelievable
their offensive
thing.
Coordinator too.
Yeah, I mean they're horrible, man. That's a disappointing team. That's the place you don't want to be. You don't want to have that kind of a season if you're John Harbaugh around here.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And they had that to some degree in 2015. They were very competitive in those games, but they still finished 5-11, and they were heading in that direction even before Joe Flacco got hurt. So, they've managed to avoid that, and you can call it mediocrity, you can call it parity, whatever you want to call it. The Ravens are in it, and it's hard to fathom a scenario where they're not going to be in it the rest of the way. And I think a lot of people that scoffed at the notion that they were still very much in it and still in good shape after the Tennessee game. And look, fans are emotional after losses. I get that. There's no question about that.
I'm emotional after losses.
Yes. I mean, that's natural. But again, take the emotion out of it and just look at the remaining schedule of all these different teams. Look at how many deficiencies so many of these teams have. And I hear what you're saying about the Chargers. I hear what you're saying about the Bengals. And are they more competitive than some of these other teams that are hovering around, 3, 4, 5 wins? Yes, I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that I think that those teams are a threat to win 10 games. They're not a threat to run the table. I'm guessing they'd have a really tough time winning 9 games. I said to you going into the Green Bay game, I wouldn't be shocked, and this was when I had my doubts about the Ravens winning in Green Bay, and I didn't realize just how bad Brett Hundley was. But I said at the time I wouldn't be completely stunned if an 8-8 team, let's say the Ravens were the team that kind of faltered unexpectedly. I'm not sure any of these other teams are getting the 9 wins. So it's kind of sitting there for one of these other teams to maybe get on a roll. But again, you look at those remaining schedules, and even the Bengals, they're 4-6. Yeah, they haven't let their season completely go down the tubes. At the same time, I think their strength of victory is so much worse than everyone else right now that how real is it? They've beaten some really bad teams, but at the same time, you look at the Ravens and you understand that they haven't exactly beaten too many juggernauts to this point, and they've had some really good fortune. We've kind of had this narrative about the woe is me thing from an injury standpoint that has kind of leveled off. They've stayed, from about the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, they've managed to avoid some of those catastrophic injuries. They certainly had their share in the preseason, but I think at the same time, you can talk about health. You can talk about the fact that their offense isn't at full strength. We get that. But at the same time, you look at how this schedule has set up for them to this point and moving forward. I'll go back to what you said. If they're not in the playoffs at the end of this season, and regardless of where you think, how far they can go or how much of a threat they can be, I have big doubts about that. But they have no excuse not to be standing as the number 6 seed when this thing's over, because it couldn't set up any better if you want to be realistic about it.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST programming brought to you by Deli-ish on Wise Avenue in Dundalk. That's the New York-style deli with Reuben's corned beef and legit sandwiches like the Curly Fryer. They'll have turkey over there, too, and some leftovers as well. They cater in as well for the holidays. You get a holiday party or you need to put some trays out for the holidays. Consider the folks over at Deli-ish. You can find them at delibaltimore.com as well. I want to thank Lee Tessier and his team at Keller Williams American Premier Realty for sponsoring us here. List your house with Lee Tessier and his team and risk nothing. His team's going to get your house sold. Find out more at leetessier.com. That's Tessier, and his team at Keller Williams American Premier Realty. You can find us out at WNST.net, getting it done all week long and getting through the holiday and Thanksgiving as we set up for games here. Luke, last thing on the rest of the league here, and then we'll turn it over to the Houston Texans later on in the week. But it is not lost on me, even the Dallas Cowboys and Dak Prescott, and the old man's going crazy and suing the league and at war with all of his partners. But you lose your left tackle, you lose your running back, you lose a chance to win. I mean, boy, the Eagles just beat them down late into the night on Sunday night. The Eagles have emerged here. I think Case Keenum is that rare quarterback that has gone from a third string to a second string to a legitimate starting quarterback right now. Has that team at 8-2 and is playing very responsibly. The Saints look impressive. I mean, what's going on in the NFC? We're all going to be able to sit around and watch a little bit. We're going to see the Cowboys play. We're going to see the Vikings play on Thanksgiving. This is a nice little weekend to watch all the other teams play and then gather down to stadium Monday night and see what we got against the Texans.
Yeah, and you just said it. I mean, the NFC at this point, it's hard not to look at that conference and say this is vastly superior to top to bottom the AFC. I mean, I think it's kind of a no-brainer statement. Philadelphia, they look like a very legitimate, dangerous Super Bowl contending kind of team. I mean, 9-1 speaks for itself, and they're 7-0 in the conference. I think they've done everything you could possibly ask. And the interesting thing you mentioned, though, with some of those teams, the Eagles, despite the fact that they lost their left tackle a few weeks back, the Vikings, who, remember, their offensive line derailed them a couple years ago and last year. That's been a major problem for them. The Saints, those teams have gotten some pretty good offensive line play. That's certainly something that's important. And you mentioned the Cowboys. I think it's a great point. And I know fans always want to rally when there's an injury and you say next man up. And yes, there are cases when the next man can come up. But when you do have a lot of injuries, people say, oh, you're making an excuse. Well, the reality is you need players to win. You need good players. And especially when you have a salary cap and you have a limit on how much you can spend. This isn't the New York Yankees or the Cubs or the Dodgers, whoever you want to talk about in Major League Baseball that has a $200+ million payroll. I mean, all these teams are on a level playing field, at least in theory, from a cap dollar standpoint. Some manage better than others. Some spend to the cap closer than others, but there's all a level playing field. That said, when you have injuries, and when you have injuries to very key spots, and when you have injuries to very high-priced players that you're expecting to be among your best players on your roster, that's going to take a toll. And it's funny. I was listening to some of the talking heads. I think it was Monday morning, just talking about the Cowboys, for example, and someone was arguing that, Zeke Elliott should have taken a suspension earlier in the season. The Cowboys might have been able to survive without him a little bit more. That argument, certainly could be had another day. But
or as Bob Kraft said in the ESPN story last week, my guy got 4 games last year.
Yeah, and they won the Super Bowl. I mean, the Patriots are such an anomaly, such the exception to the norm in the NFL. But when you have a lot of injuries, it's tough to overcome. And you can scream all you want, next man up, until you're blue in the face at Lambeau Field. Brett Hundley is not Aaron Rodgers, or even half as good as Aaron Rodgers. I mean, some of these teams, whether it's quarterback, whether it's running back, wide receiver, left tackle, I mean, and you can talk the same about some of the key spots on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, it matters. Health matters. You can keep, next man up sounds great on a T-shirt.
By the way, isn't it amazing that kid could sit in meetings for 3 years and be called a number 2 quarterback and sort of be counted on, right? Like, the reason you're there is so you can go out and play against the Baltimore Ravens at home on a 28-degree day and not end the day with 0 points. You know what I mean? Like, there really is something amazing about the league and the level that these defenses play at, and the way and the complexity of the game and the nuance of the position and the incredible physical abilities it takes to be Joe Flacco and to even do it mediocre on any given day, right? To see what the next drop-off is if this league were Ryan Mallett versus Jacoby Brissett every week. I don't know how the league would look, but it would look like ugly football, right? Like, it really does take something special to see where a Brady is, to see where a Drew Brees is, and maybe even to see where a Goff or a Wentz are headed right now as far as how good they are. And a guy like Brett Hundley, who played the position, at a big school in a big way and sat behind, a big-time quarterback in the smartest room in the league, and he's had all of this film study, all of this physical ability, all the working out, all the lifting of weights, all of that, and then he gets his chance after 3 years and really can't do this very well.
Yeah, I mean, it is surprising, and it's interesting because we always talk about how this league, in general, I'm not talking 2017, I mean, I think we've seen offense be down a little bit, at least certain times of the season, and certainly you can look at some of the quarterback play, but we talk about it being an offensive-driven league, and you just look at the absolute utter lack of quality quarterback play. And again, there's different tiers of this. I mean, you have guys that are playing their best football of their career, the guys that, like Tom Brady, who defy logic, playing how he's playing at age 40, Carson Wentz and Jared Goff, and until recently, Dak Prescott, which again kind of speaks to when you don't have your full cast of characters, makes it more difficult. But you have guys playing at elite levels. You have guys kind of in that next tier. You have guys playing at mediocre levels. And you even have guys that, frankly, have regressed. I mean, we've talked a lot about it with Joe Flacco. We've talked about it. Ben Roethlisberger has a ton of talent in Pittsburgh. They've remained very healthy. And until that Thursday night game against Tennessee, take a look at his numbers. They're not so hot. So you even have quarterbacks that used to be great or used to be good, and maybe they're not at that same level as they once were, but then you do get to some of these absolute embarrassing performances. I mean, what Brett Hundley did was absolutely embarrassing on Sunday. I mean, for him to be holding the ball as long as he did and rolling out, and I mean, at one point it kind of looked like he just waited to take a sack. I mean, it was just incredible. You saw what happened with Nathan Peterman against the Chargers. I mean, that's that whole thing you could spend 20 minutes talking about. I mean, that's disgraceful how that whole thing's been handled. And I don't use that term very lightly, but a team that's in the midst of a playoff race has had issues more so defending the run. They bench a completely capable quarterback to throw a rookie in there who, frankly, had no business being in there whatsoever. Attempted 14 passes and threw five interceptions against a Chargers team that's nothing special. I mean, the Chargers have been competitive and they've lost a lot of close games, but we're not talking about the 2000 Ravens there. So you see some of these situations either by choice or just not having any development whatsoever. In the case of Brett Hundley, who looked okay the previous week, had a good fourth quarter, but for the most part, has left a lot to be desired. And it's tough following a guy like Aaron Rodgers, but you just see some of these quarterbacks in this league, and you do wonder then, how is it an offensive-driven league? How have we seen points scored? And, we've just seen a lot of quarterbacks hurt
And just how hard this is to do. That can't be lost on folks, that people that are training years and years at the highest levels and jobs and franchises, including the Green Bay Packers. I mean, you just felt the air come out of the tires there, right? I mean, all the way around, the ticket prices, everything about it is the level of expectation was on one guy, and when he's gone, it's all over with. And that's the NFL right now, right?
It is. It really is. Even with quarterbacks that are kind of hovering at that line of demarcation between franchise quarterback and also ran, it's definitely a slippery slope, and that's why when a team finds a franchise quarterback, it's so tough. You want to pay him, but then you understand you have to pay him, but then you understand that a lot of that supporting cast has to go away, whether it's that year necessarily or 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. I mean, it's very, very tough. That's why, when you're New England and you have Tom Brady, it's just you get a dynasty. When you have quarterbacks who might be a franchise quarterback and then you have to pay them and you have some missteps, then you're kind of in that. You're in that Ravens territory that they've been in the last 5 years. Your margin for error becomes much, much smaller then. And right now, teams like Dallas and Philadelphia and the Rams, they're reaping the benefits of having a franchise quarterback on a rookie deal. But see how they fare 4 or 5 years from now when they're having to pay that guy, and understandably having to pay that guy. But you see how much more difficult it becomes to have a good enough cast around that guy.
If only the Redskins had paid Kirk Cousins. Hey, man, great to have you aboard. Great to get you out to Lambeau Field. We're going to send everybody out to stay in touch with Luke all week. We get an extra day to get ready for the day and a half, really, to get ready for the Monday night game. Then, of course, the Detroit Lions coming in. Hope everybody's having a great Thanksgiving out there. You can find Luke, Baltimore Luke, on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. You can find me out in the Buy at Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning, free of charge at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on our WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard and Dennis Colazzos here each and every Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. I am a very available individual throughout the holidays. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.